Now to the Your Rights at Work campaign. This was put together as a community, media and advertising campaign to counter work choices. What effect do you think the Your Rights at Work campaign had on the course of events before the last election?
Look, I'm somebody who takes a long interest and have had a long-standing interest in Labor history and have continued to have that, and I look at it, Labor movement campaigns around the world, and I think the Rights at Work campaign is one of the most significant union campaigns anywhere, anytime. I know that's a big call, but what you had is the entire movement coming together, working out a common position, and then fighting on many fronts in a coordinated fashion. Now, finding any labour movement anywhere in the world at any time in the past able to do that, it's a pretty rare event. And so the fact that it could articulate a clear position, that you could mobilise people at neighbourhood level, in workplaces, communicate to them through the media with ads, mobilise the research community, ensure that you've got the best quality data on these issues. Campaigns of this order and sophistication and quality are hard to find, and I think it's, almost without equal.
Do you think the Your Rights at Work campaign reasserted the positive role that unions play? Do you think it reasserted that in the public consciousness to some degree, and also re-evaluated and highlighted the values that unions have actually helped bring to Australia over the last 100 or so years?
I think the Rights at Work campaign was essentially a defensive campaign. It was saying we have over a century established a notion of decency, and at the core of the campaign was decency is under attack, and that's why it resonated with so many people, both coalition supporters and ALP supporters and Greens, because there was a notion of civilised standards under assault. Now, there wasn't much of a positive image about how you move forward. It was more, these are basics we've got to take for granted, and in that sense it was a very sophisticated defensive campaign. That's not to take away from it. I mean, when you're in the firing line and you're about to be blown out of the water, surviving an assault like that is a significant achievement, but I think there's considerable unfinished business in moving from the defensive and in moving to a more progressive and forward-looking position, and I don't think the movement has got to that space yet. I think they've survived an extraordinary assault, but you just can't survive an assault. You've actually got to, as the Romans said, the best means of defence is attack. And to think that the battle's been won, I think, would be a serious strategic error.
Do you feel that the Your Rights at Work campaign held a mirror up to unions themselves and helped them to actually realise what they were capable of, and perhaps values that really had gone a bit undiscovered or forgotten along the way?
Yeah, I think that Workchoices exposed the unions to a near-death experience, so they had to ask themselves some very basic questions. If we are to survive, what's it going to take? And if we do survive, what are we going to do? And what's our place in the world? And these weren't questions that unions had been asking deeply for a long time. They'd been part of a steady evolution of labour law over the course of the 80s and into the 90s, but with Workchoices the question was put on centre stage: do unions have a right to exist? And they said yeah, and they said, well, how are we going to get, if you like, a licence to operate? And they said, well, we've got to win the support of the community, and we've got to get engaged with a wider array of practices than normal. So they engaged with the media, but I, as a researcher, had a closer engagement than previously. So, for example, our centre's got a large-scale project evaluating the impact of Workchoices and how that affects the evolution of the labour contract. Now, and it wasn't just me. There was a network of about 20 researchers doing very important original analysis of what was going on. So that wouldn't have happened without the unions thinking about how you defend rights at work. And they didn't just go out and have a general strike. They didn't just go out and have a protest down the street. They thought very deeply and I think very creatively. And I think that near-death experience has been rejuvenating.
So what are the social gains that the next generation of unionists and Labor governments need to be looking at and aspiring to?
Well, I'm pretty radical in this front. I think basically everything that's worked in the past won't work nearly as effectively in the future. So in a sense, the traditions of bread and butter unionism worked well in the 19th century and the 20th century, and the movement, I think, has got to come up with a whole new frame of thinking about solidarity. It's got to think about how you use notions of fairness and equality to integrate with both economic practice but also a notion of a civilised life at large. And I think we've seen pointers for this. The green movement has shown the importance of issues of sustainability. The climate itself is telling us that we've got to do things differently. And I think the movement's got to take up these broader issues. You've got to remember the Labor movement wasn't formed around, you know, a 5 bob a day campaign. The key issues for it were very much hours of work and the kind of society we want to live in. And I think the Rights at Work really put that on centre stage. They said, what kind of society do we want to have? And Rights at Work's got to be a plank in that. But it's not the only thing about life, and I think if the movement's to move forward, it's got to stand on that plank that it's created and take a step forward. It just can't simply, you know, maintain it, sand it back and paint it every 100 years or so. It's actually got to be, I think, a little more daring.